Before we dive into the fuel injection system today, I want to do a quick update on the last video. As we saw in the previous video, and I'll put a link up there, we made a new stainless exhaust for the car, and it is almost perfect. The one complaint that I do have is at about 3,500 RPM, it's pretty raspy. At very low throttle, I can make it pretty quiet to drive around town. But with any kind of throttle, it's pretty loud. And I think, as I said previously, that probably has to do more with the fact that it has a resonator on it rather than a muffler. So as the exhaust gas speed increases, it's just pushing right past it like it's a straight pipe. So I actually found this. This is a MagnaFlow stainless. It's part number 12635, and it's just a universal 2 1/4 in, 2 1/4 out. It's longer than what we had, but what's cool about this is that it is a round muffler with a top inlet and a bottom outlet. So my hope is that when we cut the resonator off, we can tuck this one up in tight, and that bottom outlet will stick out below the valence so that I can just put on a little short exhaust tip, and hopefully it'll be a little bit less raspy. All right, so let's get the new exhaust system off again and test fit this thing up, see how it looks. So I've had to make a few little modifications to the muffler in order to make it work. And basically, we have cut off almost all of the stubs on both ends in order to get it to fit. With the muffler hanging up on the car in roughly the right position, you can see it's going to hang down about 2 or 3 inches below the body line, which I'm not super thrilled about, but this is the first iteration of this exhaust, and who knows, it may change a dozen times. And then once we get that tacked into place, I picked up this kind of slash cut tip that's just going to come straight out the back. So hopefully, between the new muffler and extending the exhaust a little bit further past the car, it'll make it just that much more manageable. All right, let me get this tacked into place, then we can make a new muffler hanger and go take it for a test drive. All right, here's the new exhaust, number 2. So let's try this muffler out and see how well it works. With the new exhaust finally on and a muffler that I'm pretty happy with, let's go take it for a test drive and see exactly how much of a difference there is. So riding along at about 40 miles an hour, it is significantly quieter than it was before. We are at 89.2, 88.7 decibels. So marked decrease in sound pressure at just a cruise RPM. Sitting here at idle, it is even more noticeable that it's quieter. We are at about 83.8 decibels, 84 decibels. Pretty noticeable decrease in sound pressure. All right, let's go take this on some wide open throttle rips so you can hear what it sounds like, so we can get some measurements, and then we'll take it out on the interstate and see what it sounds like. All right, let's do a quick wide open throttle rip from about 0 to 60 or so. So the top of a third gear at about 6,000 RPM, 5,500 or so, we were at 93.9 decibels. So not really significantly louder or quieter than it was with the initial exhaust, but definitely a little bit quieter and a lot less raspy than with the vibrant ultra quiet resonator. At 60 miles an hour, 3,000 RPM, we're at 93.2 decibels, with our dominant frequency being about 47 hertz or so. So definitely brought the frequency down a good bit and brought some of the volume down. I think this is something I can live with. All right, now that the exhaust is finally done for now, let's move on to what we really want to work on, which is the fuel injection system. Every once in a while, when working on cars, there's a project that is so big that it seems overwhelming, but you're so excited to get started on it. Today is that day because we're starting to build the fuel injection system for the flooded Corvair. Hey everybody, welcome back to Auto Anatomy. My name is Sean. Thanks for joining us. Today we're starting on part one of probably 2 to 3 parts of a huge project for the flooded Corvair. Now, I've mentioned previously that I wanted to build a custom fuel injection system for the car. And I've had a lot of people ask me, why don't I just reach out to Ted Brown? He's actually pretty much local to me and pick up one from him. His stuff is fantastic. The people that I know that have used it have absolutely loved it. For me, it's more of just seeing if I can do it. Now, a little backstory. Before I was a nurse practitioner, I worked for a company designing computer chips for the automotive application, doing some reverse engineering, working on fuel injection systems, things like that. So it's not totally foreign, but I've never built one from scratch. So my plan is to use some regular off-the-shelf stuff, things that are easy to get in case we break down, so that I'm not using like some unobtainium parts, because I do want to drive this car more. And let's be honest, it's a Corvair. It's going to break down occasionally, and I want to be able to pick up parts at my local auto parts place. So before we get too far into it, if you love seeing classic cars get brought back to life, take just a moment and hit that subscribe button and click on the bell to be notified when new videos come out. All right, let me show you kind of what I'm thinking, and then we can dive into starting the fabrication. I've got an empty case here on the stand with some heads and jugs. Nothing in it, just empty. But I think it'll be easier to try and show you what I'm doing here, as well as work on this rather than having to bend over the actual car. So what I'm thinking is having a large throttle body, something about right here or so, that'll come Y off and drop down onto the carb pads themselves. That way, if I ever did want to convert this thing back to carbureted, I'm not modifying anything permanently. Now, at some point, we may want to do like a sequential injection system, but in order to do that, I would really rather do some 140 heads. So for right now, we're just going to do bank fire with one injector, kind of firing directly down through the throat here on each side. So it'll be one bank firing, then the other bank firing. To control everything, we're going to be going with the micro squirt computer. This is a really compact, do-it-yourself kind of system. A lot of aftermarket support, very cost-effective, and frankly, this will do everything that I need for right now. The two things that I hope to accomplish at the end of this first part is, one, getting the manifold fabricated so we can actually sit it on the engine and make sure everything fits appropriately. And the second thing is, I want to get the wiring done. Now, you might ask, why wiring right now? Partly because I've got a wideband O2 sensor set up that's going to interface with the microsquirt system. And I want to take this thing out as it is right now with a carbureted setup and see what our air-fuel ratios look like at various throttle positions, at idle, at cruise, at wide open throttle, so we can really have some A to B comparison data. And what makes it truly nice is having that new stainless exhaust system on there. I've got an O2 sensor bung right after the merge collector, so we'll get a good sampling of our exhaust gases from both banks. I think the first thing I want to do is show you the throttle body that we're going to be using for this application, and then make up a mounting flange, kind of roughly hang it where I want it, and then that'll let me kind of reference everything else. And then we can make the flanges where the carburetors used to sit that'll bolt down onto the cylinder heads, and we can just kind of mock everything up, show you where it's all gonna land, and then we can start working on the wiring. Let's dive in. So I picked up a Fox Body Mustang throttle body, and this is just a stock like 60 millimeter, 58 millimeter, whatever it is. And I think this will be more than adequate for, even any upgrades that I want to do in the future. These cars were 225 horsepower, 5-liter V8. One thing I like about the Fox Body Mustang throttle body is they're ubiquitous. I mean, they are everywhere. They made a whole bunch of these cars. So if we are traveling and something happened, I needed a gasket, really easy to get. Plus, the idle air control motor works seamlessly with a micro squirt system, and the throttle position sensor is easy. It's 3 wires, and it's got a ball stud on the end. So let's cut out a mounting flange, and then we can just kind of suspend the throttle body, I don't know, about there or so, and then take some measurements off the car over there and see what we think is going to work right. So knowing that this is aluminum and we're going to be putting some bolts into this to hold the throttle body in place, I'm not really a big fan of just tapping aluminum. I like having a helicoil in there. So we're going to drill this out and then tap and put helicoils in for a 5/16 18. That way when I bolt the throttle body on, it's actually pulling against the helicoil rather than the aluminum plate itself. For me, it's just an extra little layer of protection. So we'll drill this out and then run the tap through it and then helicoil these in place. Then we've got to drill this out. I've got a 70 millimeter hole saw. Drill this guy out, round the corners, and then pretty much this will be ready to go. All right, now that we've got the throttle body kind of flange mounted and ready for welding and mocking up, the next thing that I really want to work on is figuring out a way to hook the throttle linkage of the Corvair up to this Mustang throttle body. Now, I fully admit that I'm not a machinist. I've never done line drawings before, but I threw together a few ideas on how I think we can make a mount that works pretty easily to mount this Mustang throttle body onto a Corvair. So coming around to the diagram itself, we've got our throttle body here. Let me see if I can position this appropriately. And essentially what we're going to do is take this piece of Z-channel and drill 2 holes here and cut it out in the center, and that will slide in, and then we will cut it off about here and make a little tab that will weld on here so that a cable can come in from this side and pick up this ball stud and go this way for wide open throttle. So using this diagram I've got here, and I'll put this on my website if anyone's interested, let's go ahead and mark this guy out and mock it up, see if we can make a throttle body linkage. So with the throttle body flanges cut out and kind of roughly in position and the carb flanges mounted on the heads, let me show you kind of what I'm thinking about for how I'm going to route this, this tubing. So what I'm thinking is we're going to take some 2-inch aluminum tubing and come in, and that's going to be the primary part of our intake system, and then step it down to 1.5 inches where it drops right into the carburetor flange. Because if you measure the original carburetor flange, it's about this size. So I think the first thing that I want to do is let's get an idea of roughly what degree bend I need to make. This is too little. It needs to be a little bit more than this, so we're probably going to end up with some pie cuts. But I want to make sure that I can also not make it too sharp where I can't get these bolts on and off again. So I've got a little measuring to do, a little calculating of some angles, and then I think it's time to start making some chips. So with the intake welded here together, next step is going to take and try and figure out my location for the fuel injector. Now this is a 55 pound/hour injector, which should be more than enough to feed one bank of cylinders. And what I'm thinking is it's going to go somewhere right about there, so we'll have a direct shot straight down through the intake, kind of basically right through the middle of this weld. All right, so let me mark this, get a hole drilled out, and then we can weld in the bung. Almost. Got to get the angle just a little bit straighter, and we can tack it in. So now that the cylinder head sides are done, it's time to work on the plenum to go to the throttle body. And what's going to make this a little bit more tricky is just some complex math and trying to figure all this out, because we're going to Y together two 2-inch pipes into a 2.75, but not only are we Ying the two, one of them is offset and both of them are angled down about 20 degrees. So I'm going to have to break out some of my my old textbooks and see if I can figure out the geometry behind this. I think what it's going to end up being is taking some circumference measurements and laying some tape around, and then, I don't know, it's going to be tricky to figure out. But the long and short of it is, these two pipes are going to come together and join something about like this into the 2.75-inch throttle body for the Fox Body Mustang. So let me bust out a pencil and some paper and do some quick calculations, and then we'll be right back to make some cuts on the chop saw. Okay, so if our throttle body is 2.780 inches in diameter, and this is going to represent that, and our pipes are 1.980 inches. To calculate the circumference is going to be times pi, and that's going to give us what, 8.733 inches in circumference. Now, the diameter or the circumference of the small pipes is 6.157 inches. 6.157 times 2 is going to give us 12.314 inches. All right, and then we subtract 8.733, and that's going to give us 3.581 inches. Now, that's the total difference between the two. Now we have to divide that by 2 for each one of the pipes. Is 1.790 inches. So we'll take the 6.157 minus 1.790 is going to give us 4.367 inches. Now this is the circumference that we need in order to add two of them together to get to the 2.78 inch pipe. Now what I've done is if you make a piece of paper that's 4.37 inches and you lay it on one side, and then you wrap it all the way around to the 4.367 inch mark. This distance right here is 0.38 inches. So we're going to set up a fixture in the chop saw. So we're going to have a 21-degree block, and then a stop block at 0.38 inches. And we can set a pipe here at that angle and at that stop block. And in theory, when I slice down, that should give us not only the circumference that we need, but also the angle that we need. Now, let's go see if this actually works. All right, so we've got our block here set up at 21 degrees, and then our stop block at 0.38 inches. So in theory, all I need to do is hold this flush up against here and then cut straight down. All right, let's go over the bandsaw and just get this last little bit here and hold it up and see what we got. Okay, I need to cut a little off this end here so we can hold it up in place, but I think that's actually going to work pretty well. Actually, I think that's going to be pretty darn perfect. Just need to open this up a little bit so we can clamp it here, use some clamps to expand this out just a little bit to get it into a roughly round shape. And then we'll do the exact same thing on the other side to make the, I guess that would be the passenger side pipe. And then we can expand this out, put a couple of tack welds in it, and then put our muffler expander, our pipe expander, to truly get it out to the 2.8 inch throttle body opening. And then we can start tacking this thing together and see how it fits. All right, so I've hammered this out just a little bit to try and expand it some. All right, let me get a few more clamps on here, see if we can just open it up a little bit more. So for the passenger side pipe, the second pipe, since it's not coming in at exactly the same angle, so these two pipes are offset just a little bit, I just want to hold this roughly up in place and make sure I know how far down to cut, because I don't want to cut all the way down to the end of the pipe here, because then we'll have an open pipe. So holding it up, it looks like roughly about here. So we'll cut only up to about here. And then we'll just have to start like inching away at it to make sure it's a good fit. All right, with this pipe kind of roughly cut out and expanded, and this pipe roughly cut out and expanded, I've got a little bit of work to do here to get the two to merge. So we need to mark, it's going to be roughly here. All right, let's cut a little bit more and just inch up on this. All right, we are so close. I've got just a little bit more trimming right here, then we can start tacking this thing together. With the throttle body on and everything kind of polished up, let's go ahead and assemble the intake manifold. You'll notice I also put on just a little rolled a bead into the tubes here just to help it seal a little bit. We've got some silicone 1.5 to 2 inch couplers, and these are just gonna hopefully snap on something about like that. So with the throttle body installed and these 1.5 to 2 inch silicone couplers in place, you can finally get a first look at what the intake's gonna look like. So with that part complete, let's move on to the wiring. We're gonna mount the micro squirt computer, mount the wideband sensor, and I've got a fuse box that's just gonna run some ancillary stuff, power up the computer, things like that. So let's lay the wiring harness in place and kind of get a rough idea of where things are gonna lie out. Okay, so in order to mount the map sensor and kind of have a vacuum like common manifold here, I took a piece of bar stock, and it's just like 1.5 by 1.5 inch, and drilled a hole all the way through from one end to the other, and then some tap holes, and then another hole under the map sensor here, just to give me like a common place where I can, you know, draw vacuum from. These ends are also tapped, so if I ever do need another vacuum source, I can just unscrew one of these plugs, and that'll just give me another place to tap into some vacuum. All right, let me get this mounted. On the back side of the driver's side wheel arch, made just a little metal mounting bracket and mounted the micro squirt computer, the Innovate LC2 wideband, and then this is just a fuse panel where you've got the fuel pump relay, a switched power relay, and then fuses for like the computer, wideband, everything there. Also mounted some power taps in basically just the original location. It just gives me a little bit more flexibility to add things as I see fit. I think the next step is let's grab the wiring harness for the micro squirt and just kind of lay it out roughly over the engine, see where things kind of need to be, and we can start zip tying it in place and then ultimately come back and loom it all together. Well, I think I have things kind of roughly laid out where I need them to be. So let's go lay this thing over the engine bay and see what it looks like. I went ahead and pulled the carburetors off because I really want to go ahead and lay out where everything's going to be. I think this is as good a time as any to mount the new fuel injection manifold on and see how it fits. It's hard to believe, but about half of the wiring is done. Got the wiring all done and loomed for the mass airflow meter and for the bank 1 injector, which is in the passenger side, and then got the map sensor all wired up and loomed there. So what I'm going to do now is just run some loom all the way across the car, and then it will tuck in tight behind the little sensor block that we've got here. So the next step is going to be just taking basically one strand at a time and cutting it to fit, soldering connectors on, that kind of stuff. And then once I've got everything done, then we'll take it all back out again and then run some loom on it. So I put the carburetors back on because I wanted to do a little data logging with things as they are right now. Now, the carburetors on this car are absolutely stock with the exception of some 52 main jets. Now, I did put a little bit larger jet in because it's got headers and cam and things like that, but nothing crazy. So I've got the laptop up running. We've got data logging is fired up. Let's go take it on a quick drive and kind of see what our air fuel ratio does at various throttle positions. Riding along at about 40 miles an hour, we're at roughly 2,000 RPM. Air fuel ratio is about 13.6 to 13.9, which, you know, realistically for a 60-year-old carburetor and especially on an air-cooled engine, that's pretty decent. I'm pretty impressed that it's that good. So at idle, we're idling at about 800 RPM. Air fuel ratio is about 13 to 1, which is a little richer than I thought it'd be. But considering it's an air-cooled engine, it seems to be happy right here. Not really going to complain too much about that. Let's take it on a wide open throttle rip and see what it does. So it looks like starting at about 1400 RPM, so just off of idle, our air fuel ratio is pretty lean, so 1530. And then once you really start to ramp up, it takes a good, let's see, how long for the air fuel ratio to really recognize. Looks like 1500 to about 2700, so 1200 RPM before it really starts to drop our air fuel ratio. And then first gear, pretty good, 13.5, 13.7, starting to get a little bit leaner. Shifting into second, drops down to 10.7, and then kind of follows our RPM curve pretty steadily, 13.9, 14.1, 14.2. Overall, I think the carburetors have done a pretty remarkable job of managing the air fuel ratio, given that they are 60 years old. Now, this is where I think fuel injection is really going to shine, because it's going to allow us to maintain a consistent air fuel ratio across all types of weather, all types of elevation, because we are going to be driving this car a whole lot more to shows this year. This seems like a natural spot to go ahead and end part one of the fuel injection build. Coming up on part 2, we're going to be building the fuel system. We're going to do an in-tank fuel pump with a return line, and then I'll share some of my thoughts about how we're going to manage the ignition system. For now, we're just going to do a fuel-only system, but ultimately, we're going to do fuel and spark. That's going to wrap up this video. Thank you all so much for all of your support. With your help, we just hit 1 million views on our YouTube channel. So I can't thank you enough for all of the love, support that you've shown for us. Take care of yourselves. God bless. We'll see you soon.